Welcome back to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Niall Stanage.
Well, media mogul Shari Redstone is speaking out on why she decided to sell Paramount, the parent company of CBS, to Skydance, a business transaction that drew criticism from many liberal commentators, including ones working for CBS, as it became clear that Redstone wanted to settle a lawsuit with President Trump rather than face the prospect of losing that deal. Now, in an interview with the New York Times, Redstone also revealed that the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel changed her own priorities. Quote, "Once that happened, I wanted out," she said. "I wanted to support Israel and address issues around anti-Semitism and racism."
Redstone also confessed to the Times that she thought some of her own network's coverage of Israel's war on Gaza was biased. Redstone even said, quote, "We needed more balance. Part of me thought maybe Trump could accomplish what I never got done." That's a comment that is likely to raise eyebrows. At the same time, other strong supporters of the State of Israel are making clear that criticism of the current Netanyahu government is not anti-Semitism. I myself recently interviewed Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, about his views on that subject. Let's watch. There's obviously an argument that you and others have made that the current actions are in fact very damaging for Israel in the eyes of the world, right?
Absolutely. Look, and many Israelis, including the government spokesman and the senior minister and the prime minister, fell in love with the need to keep saying all the time, everyone is an anti-Semite, all those that criticize Israel are anti-Semites. There are many anti-Semites, unfortunately, many. And in some places, the expressions of anti-Semitism were obvious and heartbreaking and dangerous. But there are many, many, many who are against this government of Israel, not because they are anti-Semite, just because they think that this government is reckless, irresponsible, and totally unacceptable, just as we think in Israel, so many of us. And we are not anti-Semites.
And people can watch the rest of that interview on the Hill's YouTube page. Great interview.
Thank you.
Awesome that you got that. Just on the kind of broader Israel point, before we circle back to Shari Redstone, I was actually just, before we started filming this, getting into an argument with, guess who, on Twitter, Laura Loomer.
Oh, fantastic. Delighted to hear it.
Who responded to me. I was tweeted Megyn Kelly's interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene, where Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about dwindling support for Israel among MAGA. And I just say, I've now even talked to some pro-Israel people who say the aid should get cut off because that we're just losing all support from the MAGA base. And I said something to that effect. So Laura Loomer said, of course, well, that's not really how MAGA feels, or Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't speak for MAGA. And then somebody else was like, yeah, it's all foreign influence fun. I'm like, oh, so the anti-Israel people are just the foreign influence?
Right.
Like, come on, this is so silly. It's obvious if you talk to particularly younger conservatives, there is a changing perception of Israel, and Israel is doing itself no favors in terms of the actions they're taking in Gaza, and then also being so reliant on American taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think the generational shift that you point out there is really where the dividing line is. Yes, it is true that among Democrats there is broadly more sympathy for the Palestinians than among Republicans. But when you look at the youngest generation of Republicans, that distance narrows quite a lot. And there is obvious skepticism about just the endless money being used to fund these actions by Israel that just appall people on a human level, and that's, I think, why there's such pushback against them. Olmert in that interview was talking about the fact that he, naturally enough, supported the initial actions that were taken after October 7th, because nobody was expecting Israel to suffer that kind of attack and say, oh well. But now he thinks it's going to destroy the soul of Israel, or what Israel's about, was his quote, because it is so damaging.
Right, and I did as well. I thought a terrorist attack them, they have to respond. And I knew that in the course of doing that, innocent people, unfortunately, were going to die. This is a level of destruction and devastation that I think just goes so far beyond what can be conscienced. And also that they have killed so many members of Hamas, including the people responsible for the attack. So why you would not eventually put up a mission accomplished banner rather than continue just the starvation and all that, it's so horrifying. So Shari Redstone making these comments, very interesting. Not expected from me. It matters, of course, because of the Trump administration's lawsuits against 60 Minutes. It was an answer about Israel, the Kamala Harris answer that was edited, and the Trump administration didn't like how it was edited and sued on that basis. To hear Shari Redstone herself saying that she thinks, so both that almost she wanted to do something else with her life, she wanted to support pro-Israel causes, but also that the media company she was running, she thought was not pro-Israel enough.
Right.
That's interesting.
No, absolutely. It's interesting on a whole lot of levels. I mean, one of her objections was that 60 Minutes, quite separate from the Harris thing, had run a report, which I remember, about State Department people under Biden who had resigned because they felt the continuing giving of arms to Israel while it was engaged in these pretty slaughterous actions was not justified, and so they left. She objected to that segment running at all, it seems like, because it doesn't comport with her own beliefs. I mean, I wouldn't agree with her view on that, obviously. Now, as far as the Trump lawsuit is concerned, I think that the editing on that 60 Minutes interview with Harris was entirely standard, and my view would be that Trump essentially extorted CBS because, of course, this was all against the backdrop of a merger that has now gone through between Paramount and Skydance, which needed the Trump administration's approval. But just briefly on the Shari Redstone element in this, Robby, what I was struck by was how she really didn't seem to think of running a news organization or an organization that has a news component as any different or involving any kind of ethical imperative to stand up against political intimidation. It was just like, well, it would be better for the shareholders to settle that case and get the merger through, so there we go. And however precious...
She's going to get millions and millions and millions of dollars for her family. It's hers to sell. I don't know.
It is hers to sell, but I mean, I do think that all of us as journalists, without sounding too, precious about it, we are reliant upon the people who run or own our organizations having some understanding that good journalism will often draw the wrath of powerful people. And so long as the journalism is defensible, it needs to be defended.
I think this also shows, and I kind of said this on Rising today, the difficulties in trying to present yourself as that totally unbiased perspective, just news, that is traditional journalism does. But you have to make all sorts of perspective-driven editorial decisions all the way down, on non-complicated issues, particularly on complicated issues like Israel-Gaza. Like, how do you even characterize the conflict? Is it Israel's war on Gaza, or Israel's war versus Hamas, or is someone
Israel's assault on
the
Gaza.
siege on Gaza, or something like that? Those are all editorial choices that tip an audience one way or the other. And you get into trouble if you're pretending to be neutral. And frankly, you invite, and I largely agree with you on the Trump administration's actions, or he can complain about it, he can tweet at them that it's bad. He shouldn't, unless it's actual defamation, you shouldn't be suing because you don't like the editorial choices being made. You shouldn't use the threat of I'm big government and I can stop this merger to extort some kind of editorial control and all that. But almost them trying to claim to be unbiased almost invites that kind of scrutiny. Well, you said you're unbiased, but you did it this way or that way. Where if you just have even opinion-based, I'm a pro-Israel person, or I'm someone deeply skeptical of Israel, and here's what I think, and then you bring on a guest who disagrees, you avoid some of that. Well, it's neutral, but the owner of the company doesn't quite like it the way it's being done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. I mean, the whole argument about objectivity in journalism is actually much more complicated than it appears. I mean, I do think that the division between opinion and news is kind of dissolving in real terms, and people...
And I kind of think that's a good thing.
Possibly so. I mean, I think that once we get more clearly into that new era, maybe it will be revealed as a good thing. To your point about bias, a very good New York Times story, incidentally, on this Shari Redstone matter, buried way deep down in it is a fact that 60 Minutes did a Joe Biden interview in 2023, and there's this internal debate about whether Biden seemed basically out of it, and Redstone was told that he had to be prodded to answer, and then people said, no, he just seemed tired, but they weren't prodding him to answer it. And so she was worried that the Trump lawsuit would ultimately reopen that can of worms that would also potentially be reputationally damaging.
Yes, she does not want to be, I don't think any media organizations wants to feel any more complicit in contributing to the public feeling misled about how out of it Biden was, fairly or not.
Right.
That's a very good point. Well, it's interesting. We'll have to see. I think this article is going to create a lot more fodder from liberals for the whole idea that the owner of the company was just totally beholden to Trump and was going to make. Now it doesn't actually sound like the Stephen Colbert decision really. There's no new evidence that was connected to him being let go to please Trump. But people of that mindset are going to read this interview and go, I really don't like that person.
Yeah, because she just didn't defend the journalism enough. The Colbert thing, you're right, the evidence weighs increasingly on the fact that was a business decision, but the timing of it left them open to these suspicions.
We'll be back with more Free Media right after this.